The far north of Iceland, where the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates tear themselves apart, is a place of raw, uncompromised power. The land is defined by fire and ice, a chaotic canvas of geothermal energy and perpetual frost. And beneath that chaotic surface, a secret cabal of NATO physicists believed they could stabilize the chaos and, briefly, touch the perfect stillness of the universe. They called it the zero-point inversion. Dr. Alistair Finch was chasing a forgotten signature, a faint, impossible energy reading documented by a civilian seismic station in the late 1990s. The signal indicated an area of negative entropy, a localized zone where the laws of decay were momentarily, impossibly, reversed. The coordinates led him to the Geothermal Temporal Drilling Initiative (GTDI) site. The GTDI facility was a brutal, squat presence on the black, desolate lava fields, disguised as a deep-bore geothermal power test. It was abandoned in 1999, left to the mercy of the wind and the freezing rain. Alistair, a man whose life was dedicated to observing the inexorable march of time, found the project's core structure. A massive, central drill hole, its interior lined with rusted, thick metal casing, plunging thousands of feet into the unstable mantle. The purpose of GTDI, as documented in fragmented, heavily coded files Alistair retrieved, was to utilize the immense, chaotic geothermal energy to briefly stabilize quantum fluctuations at the very edge of the Earth's crust, thereby achieving temporal inversion, a brief, controllable moment where a single object could be forced to age backward. He descended the bore using specialized equipment, the descent an eerie journey through decades of frozen decay. The internal metal casing was thick with rust and hoarfrost, the air heavy with sulfur and the metallic scent of old, unstable machinery. At a depth of exactly 3,280 feet, Alistair's Geiger counter screamed a silent warning. It wasn't radiation. It was a burst of inverted energy. And then his camera caught it. Nestled in a small side-chamber alcove carved into the bedrock, held in place by a now-frozen, complicated scaffolding, was the artifact. It was a single, perfectly spherical metallic object, about the size of a bowling ball. It was heavily scarred by deep pits and corrosion, clearly suffering from extreme wear. But as Alistair approached, he saw the terrifying anomaly. The corrosion was rapidly disappearing. The rust was visibly receding, the pits were smoothing out, and the scarred, oxidized metal was being replaced by a slick, futuristic sheen. The sphere was actively, visibly aging in reverse. He recognized the sphere as a containment vessel for exotic matter, likely a proprietary alloy developed during the Cold War. The GTDI had achieved their goal. They had inverted the entropy of the sphere, making it run backward in time. Alistair secured the sphere and brought it back to the abandoned lab facility above ground. The lab was a testament to the haste of the project's abandonment. Equipment covered in thick frost and volcanic ash, analog gauges frozen mid-measurement. He immediately placed the sphere into a heavily shielded analysis chamber and connected his own sensors. The readings defied every known law of thermodynamics. His entropy meter, a precise instrument designed to measure decay, was violently shaking and pegged against the negative or reverse reading. The sphere was emitting a constant, chaotic field of inverted entropy, consuming the decay around it to become physically newer. The metallic sphere was gaining mass, density, and polish at a steady, measurable rate. It was not gaining energy. It was gaining past. Alistair consulted the fragmented GTDI logs. The project director, Dr. Soren Kvist, had theorized that if an object could be forced to reverse its timeline, it would eventually reach its zero point, the moment of its fabrication, its birth. After that, Kvist speculated the object would continue to rewind, becoming the raw materials from which it was made. The current rate of inversion meant the sphere was reverting roughly 1 month of aging every hour. Kvist's final log entry, scribbled frantically, warned, "The sphere is approaching its 0 point too fast. We failed to calculate the temporal mass exchange. It is consuming the decay of the surrounding environment to fuel its reversal. If it hits 0 point, it will unleash a wave of negative entropy into the atmosphere. The entire region will unmake itself. The sphere wasn't just getting newer. It was stealing the decay of the present. The evidence of this temporal mass exchange began to manifest violently in the abandoned lab. Alistair had a dead, potted plant on his desk, left there decades ago. In the sphere's proximity, the plant did not revive. It rapidly reversed its decay. The desiccated leaves became green, then vibrant, then visibly smaller, retreating into the stem. Within an hour, the plant had reversed decades of decay, transforming back into a small, fresh cutting, indistinguishable from its state the day it was first planted. The most terrifying visual change was the lab itself. Alistair watched, utterly paralyzed, as the fine stress cracks in the concrete walls sealed themselves shut with a dry, hissing sound. Paint, flaking from the cold and moisture, re-adhered to the walls, becoming vibrant and wet. Rust, thick and heavy on the metal shelves, reverted into polished, gray steel powder that instantly fell away. The room was unwinding, actively reverting to its pristine 1990s state. Alistair realized the horrifying implications for his own survival. If the sphere continued its reversal, it would eventually target biological entropy, aging. He tested his theory with a dead insect he found on the floor. He placed it near the sphere. The insect did not decompose. It undecomposed. It reverted from a dry husk back into a living, moving fly, which immediately flew away, startled and confused. The sphere was not just a scientific anomaly. It was a localized temporal virus. Alistair looked at his own hands. His skin, aged by 50 years of life, felt taut, smooth, and strangely cold. He looked in a cracked piece of reflective foil and saw his face. The lines around his eyes were softer, his hair slightly darker. The sphere was already compensating for the energy loss by drawing on the nearest source of entropy, Alistair's own aging process. The terror was not that he was getting younger, but that the process was violent and involuntary, a parasitic consumption of his personal timeline. Alistair knew he was running out of time. The sphere was now spotless, a perfect, mirror-like chrome object. It was nearing its 0 point, its moment of creation. Its radiation field intensified, forcing Alistair to retreat to a heavily shielded control room. The GTDI logs offered a possible, desperate solution. Kvist had theorized that the sphere could be stabilized by introducing a massive counterpulse of chaotic, high-frequency kinetic energy at the moment of its inversion peak, an attempt to overload the smooth, precise reversal with pure disorder. Alistair found the schematics for the GTDI's main kinetic oscillator, a massive, seismically stabilized machine designed to deliberately introduce chaos into the deep-bore environment. As he worked, the main lab outside his control room began its final reversal. The air was filled with the violent sound of uncreation. Equipment was folding in on itself, reverting from complex machines into their base alloy components. The sphere was now glowing with a blinding, terrifying blue-white light, the moment of its 0 point. Alistair turned the dial of the kinetic oscillator. The machine roared to life, generating a massive, earth-shaking vibration. He aimed the frequency at the sphere. The sphere didn't stabilize. It reacted violently, releasing a shockwave of inverted light and cold. Alistair's control room was instantly enveloped in a flash of blinding white. When his vision cleared, the sphere was gone. The intense gravitational drag ceased. The air was silent again. But the silence was deceptive. The sphere had not been destroyed. It had achieved its goal. Alistair stepped out into the main lab. The room was not pristine 1990s. It was worse. The massive kinetic oscillator was now a pile of gleaming, flawless metallic components, uncreated back into raw, manufactured parts. The very air was hypercooled and dry. Alistair looked down at the ground. Where the sphere had been, there was now a single, perfect, flawless obsidian black stone, impossibly cold and impossibly dense. It was the pure materialization of the inverted entropy, a relic that contained the birth of the sphere, frozen in time. The reverse clock had reached its start. Alistair secured the stone, feeling its intense, perpetual cold through his insulated gloves. He climbed out of the facility and sealed the borehole, burying Project GTDI under layers of frozen concrete. He contacted no one. The sphere was gone, but the inverted field it created lingered. Alistair lived for another 2 years, constantly monitoring the world's entropy levels. He observed an increasing number of localized, temporary reverse decay events around the world, a bridge temporarily unwinding its corrosion, a damaged circuit board spontaneously repairing itself. The reverse entropy had been briefly unleashed, but the ultimate horror was his personal, irreversible change. Alistair was not aging backward. He was static. He realized the awful truth. The sphere, in its final moment, had consumed every last bit of Alistair's remaining biological entropy to fuel its escape. He was now biologically frozen at the age he was when he left the site 50 years old. His hair would not gray. His cells would not divide and fail. He would not tire. He would not die of natural causes. He was outside the flow of time, a prisoner of perpetual middle age. Alistair Finch became an observer, watching the world decay and knowing he was no longer part of the cycle. He kept the stone, which hummed with the silent, terrifying energy of creation. He was a monument to the ultimate failure of man to control time. The object that aged in reverse was gone, but the reverse aging it enforced on Alistair was permanent. The universe had balanced the equation by making one man eternal. He knew that somewhere, sometime, the zero-point inversion would happen again. And he, the man who couldn't die, would be waiting to watch the world unmake itself once more. The terror isn't that time runs out. The terror is when time refuses to let you go.